Why is Johannes Kepler important to modern astronomy?
German astronomer Johannes Kepler, 1571–1630, put forth the theory that planets, including Earth, rotate around the Sun in elliptical orbits. But he had the help of research conducted by astronomer Tycho Brahe, 1546–1601, to use as a basis for his conclusion. In 1600 Kepler moved to Prague, Czech Republic, where he began working as an assistant to the flamboyant Brahe, a Danish aristocrat who a few years earlier, in 1576, had set up the first real astronomical observatory in history. Brahe's benefactor in this work was none other than King Frederick II. 1534–1588, ruler of Denmark and Norway, who was a patron of science. In the observatory, Brahe had made and recorded extraordinarily accurate observations of planetary positions. Even though he rejected the Copernican, sun-centered, view of the universe because it violated church beliefs, he also realized that his observations of the planets could not be explained by the Ptolemaic system. He soon put forth his own theory of planetary orbit. The taconic theory was something of a compromise between the two existing models. The sun-centered system of Copernicus and earth-centered system of Ptolemy. Brahe's model followed Copernicus's theory in that it 2. Had the planets orbiting around the Sun, but it kept to the Ptolemaic belief that the Sun orbited Earth. In this way, he accounted for a year. The theory was ignored. But when Brahe hired Kepler in 1600, he turned over his observations to him and charged him with the task of devising a theory of planetary motion. As a mathematician, Kepler was the right man for the job, and he devoted himself to the effort for the next 20 years. At one point, Kepler had devised a scheme that almost matched Brahe's observations, but not quite. Believing Brahe's observations were perfectly accurate, Kepler threw out the scheme and started again. Finally, he gave up on using circular orbits and epicicles. Smaller orbits centered on the larger ones, and began working with ellipses, ovals. When Kepler charted the planets' orbits as ellipses, the results matched Brahe's data. In 1609 Kepler published his first two laws of planetary motion, in the work Astronomia Nova. A planet orbits the Sun in an ellipse, not a circle, as Copernicus had believed. And a planet moves faster when near the Sun and slower when farther away. We also have Kepler to thank for a word that is in everyday use, satellite. After Galileo discovered the moons of Jupiter, Kepler used a telescope to view them for himself. He dubbed them satellites. Satellites is from the Latin meaning attendant, a name that stuck. The celebrated astronomer also did pioneer work leading to the invention of calculus, late 1600s.
What is the Copernican view of the universe?
The Copernican view of the universe, proposed in 1507. argued that Earth was only one of several galactic bodies that orbit the Sun. This theory, put forth by Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus, Mikołaj Kopernik, 1473 to 1543, was controversial in its day because it ran counter to the astronomical beliefs that had held sway for some 1,400 years, those of the Ptolemaic system, which maintained that Earth is the center of the universe and that the Sun and the planets all revolve around it. Copernicus devised his scheme out of necessity. Really, he had found that using the Ptolemaic system to predict the positions of the planets over long periods of time yielded haphazard results. Once he made the assumption that the Sun, rather than Earth, is the center of the solar system and that all the planets orbit the Sun, Copernicus realized that tables of planetary positions could be calculated much more easily and accurately. However, Copernicus was not the first to put forth such a radical idea. The Greek astronomer Aristarchus of Samos, c. 310 to 230 BC, was the first to maintain that Earth rotates on an axis and revolves around the Sun. But it was Ptolemy's ideas that took hold, not Aristarchus's. Copernicus did, however, take the argument a step further, averring that Earth itself is small and unimportant compared with the rest of the universe. But the Copernican view had its problems, too. Copernicus assumed that the planetary orbits were perfectly circular. Because of this error, he found it necessary to use some of Ptolemy's cumbersome epicecles. Smaller orbits centered on the larger ones. To reduce the discrepancy between his predicted orbits and those that he observed. It was not until the early 1600s that the elliptical orbit of the planets was put forth by German astronomer Johannes Kepler, 1571 to 1630.
Why is Aristotle considered one of the greatest minds in Western history?
The system of philosophy that Aristotle, 384 to 322 b.c., developed became the foundation for European philosophy, theology, science, and literature. The Aristotelian system may be so much a part of the fabric of Western culture that the only effective way to describe his philosophy is through example. Among his writings on logic is organon, meaning tool or instrument. Here he defines the fundamental rules for making an argument. While other thinkers may well have formulated the argument before Aristotle, no one had made a systematic study of it. In Organon, Aristotle puts forth a method for coming to a conclusion based on circumstantial evidence and prior conclusions rather than on the basis of direct observation. This deductive scheme, called a syllogism, is made up of a major premise, a minor premise, and a conclusion. For example, every virtue is laudable, major premise, courage is a virtue. Minor premise, therefore courage is laudable, conclusion. It is worth noting, however, that the belief in deductive logic was later rejected by English philosopher Sir Francis Bacon 1561 to 1626 in 1620, in favor of an inductive system, or one that is based on observation. In Poetics, Aristotle expounded upon his literary views. He maintained that epic and tragedy portray human beings as nobler than they truly are, while comedy portrays them as less noble than they are. In order to explain how tragedy speaks to the emotions of the spectator, Aristotle introduced the idea of catharsis. He separated tragedy from epic with the distinction that tragedy maintains unity of plot. Later translated as unity of plot, time, and place, while the epic does not. Because of the keen understanding evident in Poetics, the work has illuminated literary criticism since antiquity. In addition to logic and rhetoric, Aristotle wrote on natural science, physics, on the heavens, parts of animals, and on plants, and on ethics and politics, politics. His great philosophical work was Metaphysics, so named because, in the body of his works, it comes after, the Greek word for which is meta, the work physics. Metaphysics as a philosophy is the study of substance, or the nature and structure of reality. It is considered one of 5 major branches of Western philosophy. In modern thought, metaphysics can include many disciplines, such as cosmology, the study of the origins and structure of the universe, and theology, the study of religion. Most of the great philosophers' writings are compilations of notes from lectures he delivered to his students at the Lyceum, also called the Peripatetic School, in Athens. Among his pupils there were Greek leaders, including Alexander the Great, 356 to 323 BC.
Did Newton invent calculus?
Yes, Newton did invent calculus. But so did German mathematician Gottfried Leibniz, 1646 to 1716, independently of Newton. Both men had developed calculus in the context of trying to explain the laws of physics. Newton's development of calculus predated that of Leibniz, but he failed to publish it. Leibniz published his results in 1684, Newton followed suit in 1693. Each used different symbols and notations. But Leibniz's were considered superior and were more widely adopted, causing friction between the men. Their conflict became a matter of national pride, with English scientists refusing to accept Leibniz's version. Nevertheless, since Newton's system predated that of Leibniz, he is credited as the originator.
How extensive were George Washington Carver's agricultural discoveries?
American botanist and agricultural chemist George Washington Carver, c. 1864 to 1943, won international fame for his research. which included finding more than 300 uses for peanuts and more than 100 uses for sweet potatoes. The son of slave parents, Carver was born near Diamond Grove, Missouri, and through his own efforts obtained an education. Earning a bachelor's degree in 1894 and his Master of Science in Agriculture in 1896 from Iowa State University. That year he joined the faculty of Alabama's Tuskegee Institute, now Tuskegee University, where he served as Director of Agricultural Research until his death in 1943. His first research projects centered on soil conservation and agricultural practices. Carver gave lectures and made demonstrations to Southern farmers, particularly black farmers, to help them increase crop production. He then turned his attention to finding new uses for two Southern staple crops, peanuts and sweet potatoes. Carver found that peanuts could be used to make a milk substitute, printer's ink, and soap. He also found new uses for soybeans and devised products that could be made from cotton waste. His efforts were all intended to improve the economy in the American South and better the way of life of Southern black farmers. Carver was lauded for his accomplishments. He was named a Fellow of the Royal Society of Arts of London. 1916, he was awarded the Spingarn Medal for Distinguished Service in Agricultural Chemistry, 1923. And he was bestowed with the Theodore Roosevelt Medal for his valuable contributions to science, 1939.
Why was Galileo tried for heresy by the Inquisition?
The trouble began for Galileo, 1564 to 1642, in 1613 when he published Letters on the Solar Spots, in which he advocated the Copernican system of the universe, which proposed that Earth, along with other galactic bodies, revolves around the Sun. This view ran contrary to the accepted beliefs of the Roman Catholic Church, whose doctrine was based on Ptolemy's theory that Earth was the center of the universe and that all the planets, including the Sun, revolved around it. Thus, in 1616 the Pope issued a decree declaring the Copernican system to be false and erroneous, and Galileo was ordered not to support it. When a new Pope, Urban VIII, was coronated in 1624, Galileo traveled to Rome to make an appeal that the edict against the Copernican theory be revoked. The Pope declined to do so, but he did give Galileo permission to write about the Copernican system, under the condition that he not give it preference over the church-sanctioned Ptolemaic model. So, in 1632, Galileo published again, Dialogue concerning the two chief world systems. However, contained unconvincing objections to the Copernican view. The Church saw through it and summoned the author to Rome to stand before the Inquisition. Church interrogators. Galileo was accused of violating the original edict of 1616, put on trial for heresy, and found guilty. Though he was ordered to recant, at some point he uttered the famous statement, "And yet it moves," a reference to the Copernican theory that Earth rotates on its axis. Galileo was supposed to be imprisoned, but the Pope commuted the sentence to house arrest at Galileo's home near Florence, where he died blind at the age of 78.
What was the Ptolemaic system?
It was a scheme devised by the ancient Greek astronomer Ptolemy, c. 170 c. 100 BC. He proposed a system that placed Earth directly at the center of the universe with the Sun, the Moon, and the planets all orbiting around Earth. However, Ptolemy observed that the movement of the planets did not match his scheme, and so he added small orbits, called epicicles, to the model to try to make it work. Even though it was erroneous and complicated, the Ptolemaic system was functional enough to make predictions of planetary positions. The system took hold, influencing thinking for 1,400 years. The Roman Catholic Church adopted the system as part of its doctrine, which the church hierarchy held to even when Polish astronomer Nicholas Copernicus, Mikołaj Kopernik, 1473–1543, refuted it in 1543, arguing that the Sun, not Earth, is the center of the universe. In the 1570s, accurate measurements of planet positions that had been taken by Danish astronomer Tycho Brahe, 1546–1601, proved that the Ptolemaic system was inaccurate. But it was not until 1609, when German astronomer Johannes Kepler, 1571–1630, devised a better explanation of planetary orbits, that the Ptolemaic system was put to rest.
Is anthrax a new disease?
No, the disease dates back thousands of years, at least to biblical times. But its potential use as a bioterrorism weapon is relatively recent. Anthrax is caused by the Bacillus anthracis bacterium, spores that can survive in soil for years. It is mainly a disease of grass-eating livestock. But humans who work with herd animals may become infected through exposure. In humans, anthrax occurs as a cutaneous, skin, form, as a pulmonary, inhaled form, or as an intestinal infection after the consumption of contaminated meat. The fifth and sixth plagues on Egypt, as described in Exodus chapters 9, the pestilence, and 10, the boils, are consistent with anthrax in livestock and humans. In the late 1800s, scientists made several important discoveries regarding anthrax. The anthrax germ, Bacillus anthracis, was the first germ linked to a particular disease. In 1881, French scientist Louis Pasteur developed an inoculation to protect animals from the disease. Anthrax emerged as a potential weapon of bioterrorism during the 20th century. Several countries, including the United States, the United Kingdom, Germany, Japan, Iraq, and the former Soviet Union, experimented with the bacterium. Beginning in the 1990s, U.S. troops headed for combat in the Persian Gulf were vaccinated for anthrax.
Were there hospitals before the Middle Ages?
Public hospitals emerged during the Middle Ages, 500–1350. As Christianity spread and religious orders set up the facilities to serve the poor. Still, most people received a doctor's care in the privacy of their own homes. The concept of a public health care facility originated in India as early as the 3rd century BC, when Buddhists established hospital-like installations. The Middle Ages saw the establishment of facilities more closely resembling modern hospital, including Paris's Hôtel Dieu. Founded in the 7th century, today it is the oldest hospital still in operation. In 970, a hospital in Baghdad, in present-day Iraq, divided physicians into the equivalent of modern-day interns and externs. Its pharmacy disseminated drugs, as well as spices deemed to have medicinal value, from all over the known world.
Who was the first physician in history?
The first physician known by name was Imhotep, an Egyptian who lived about 2600 B. C. Also considered a sage, Imhotep lived at a time when the Egyptians were making progress in medicine. The advances included a textbook on the treatment of wounds, broken bones, and even tumors. Imhotep was later worshipped as a god by the Egyptians.
What is fascism?
Fascism is an extreme political philosophy that holds nation and race above the individual and supports the establishment of an authoritarian government, where absolute power is vested in the leader. In post-World War I Italy, a fascist movement developed, led by Benito Mussolini, 1883 to 1945, paralleling the rise of Nazism in Germany. Mussolini took power of the Italian government in 1922, instituting programs of economic and social regimentation. Opposition to his dictatorship was forcibly suppressed. Italy became allied with Germany, under German Chancellor and Führer Adolf Hitler 1889 to 1945. And Japan in 1936 to form the Axis powers, an alliance that was ultimately defeated by the Allied nations. Chiefly Great Britain, the United States, and Soviet Union, in World War II, 1939 to 45. Mussolini died by execution in 1945. Italy's fascist movement dramatically declined at the end of the war.
What does Epicurean mean?
While Epicurean has come to refer to anything relating to the pleasure of eating and drinking, It is an oversimplification of the beliefs of the Greek philosopher Epicurus, 341 to 270 b. C, from whose name the word was derived. While Epicurus did believe that pleasure is the only good, and that it alone should be humankind's pursuit, later scholars misinterpreted the philosophy as a license for sensory excess. In actuality, Epicurus defined pleasure not as unbridled sensuality but as freedom from pain and as peace of mind, which can only be obtained through simple living. In about 306 BC, Epicurus established a school in Athens, which came to be known as the Garden School because residents provided for their own food by gardening. There he and his students strived to lead lives of simplicity, prudence, justice, and honor. In this way, they achieved tranquility, the ultimate goal in life. According to the philosophy of Epicureanism, he further believed that intellectual pleasures are superior to sensual pleasures, which are fleeting. In fact, he held that one of the greatest and most enduring pleasures is friendship. These ideas were put forth by the Greek philosopher and writer Lucretius, c. 99 c. 55 BC, in his poem On the Nature of Things. While the Epicurean school endured for several centuries, ultimately Christian leaders deemed the philosophy a pagan creed. However, some critics have posited that the writer of Ecclesiastes in the Old Testament of the Bible was likely a member of the Garden School and that the epistles of St. Paul in the New Testament were strongly influenced by Epicurean thought. In more recent times, Thomas Jefferson, 1743 to 1826, author and signatory of the Declaration of Independence and third President of the United States, was a self-proclaimed Epicurean.
Who were the great Islamic philosophers of the Middle Ages?
Three thinkers of the Islamic world stand out as important interpreters of Greek thought, and therefore, as a bridge between ancient philosophy and the scholasticism of the Middle Ages. Their Latin names are Avan-Nasar, Averroes, and Avicenna. Avan-Nasar, c. 878 to 950, who studied with Christian Aristotelians in Baghdad, Iraq, proved so adept at applying the teachings of Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC. To Muslim thought that he became known as the second Aristotle or the second teacher. He posited that philosophy and religion are not in conflict with each other. Rather, they parallel one another. Also known for his work in interpreting the great Aristotle for the Muslim world, Avicenna, 980-1037, is sometimes referred to as the third teacher. He was also the first to expand the distinction between essence and existence. Averroes, 1126 to 1198, also was no stranger to Aristotle, writing commentaries on him as well as Plato. Specifically, the Republic, he also wrote on religious law and philosophy as well as religion and logic.
Who was Confucius and who do people still quote him?
Confucius, 551 to 479 B. C. was a Chinese philosopher whose real name was Keung Chiu. Confucius is the Latinized version. Born into a class of lesser nobility in the province of Lu. His father died before Confucius had turned 3 and he was raised in humble circumstances by his mother. He lived in the middle of China's feudal period, when there were enormous problems, including famine and poverty, which had been brought on by weak emperors and, consequently, chronic warfare among rival feudal states. Because of his upbringing, Confucius possessed a profound sympathy for the common people. In his view, the feudal princes, only interested in their own personal gain, were responsible for the suffering of the people. Confucius set out on a reform mission, believing that good government can only be achieved by ethical leaders. Confucius endeavored to train a new generation of them. He taught literature and music, important in building character, conduct, and, most importantly, ethics, to anyone who wanted to learn. He is regarded as the first Chinese teacher to offer education freely. That is to say, to all comers, rather than just the privileged. The great philosopher is revered for his belief that the family is the model for all human relations. Confucianism regards the chief relations in life to be those between ruler and subject, father and son, elder and younger brother, husband and wife, and friends. Most importantly, he taught students that rulers are responsible for the happiness of their subjects. He believed that government leaders need not be expert administrators. Instead, they must be humane, honest, and above corruption and personal gain. Some of his students went on to hold positions of power in city governments. Over the centuries, he became the most venerated person in Chinese history. But his teachings transcend cultural lines, which is why Confucian wisdom, including the principle what you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others, is often quoted. The philosophy's maxims are set forth in the work L'Union, Analects, recorded by his followers. Except for his time spent in military service, Socrates lived his entire life in Athens, where he was as well known for his disheveled appearance as for his moral integrity, self-control, and quest for wisdom. He lived during a time when attention was turning away from the physical world of the heavens, and toward the human world, of the self, the community, and the law. He participated in this turning point by walking the streets of Athens, engaging people including rulers who were supposed to be wiser than he in conversation. In these conversations, he employed what came to be known as the Socratic method or dialectic, a series of seemingly simple questions designed to elicit a rational response. Through the line of questioning, which usually centered around a moral concept such as courage, the person being questioned was intended to realize that he did not truly know that which he thought he knew. Socrates' theory was that once the person being questioned realized his weak understanding, he could divest himself of false notions, and was then free to participate in the quest for knowledge. These philosophical disputes, however, gained Socrates many enemies. Though he left no writings, Socrates' student, Plato, documented his recollections of dialogues with his teacher. A staunch believer in self-examination and self-knowledge, Socrates is credited with saying that the unexamined life is not worth living. Some ascribe the quote to Plato. Socrates also believed that the psyche, or inner self, is what should give direction to one's life, not appetite or passions. A seminal figure in Greek, and Western, thought, philosophy that predates him is termed pre-Socratic.
Why was Socrates condemned to death?
Socrates, c. 470 to 399 BC, the Greek philosopher who is credited, along with philosophers Plato, c. 428 to 347 BC, and Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, for laying the foundations of Western thought, had many followers in his own time. However, his ideas and methods were controversial, too, which led him to be tried before judges and sentenced to death, which he carried out by drinking hemlock, poison. He had been charged for not worshipping the Athenian gods and for corrupting the young.
What is the Hippocratic Oath?
The Hippocratic Oath is the pledge taken by many medical students upon graduation or upon entering into practice. While the text of the oath varies by translation, one important line reads, "I will prescribe regimen for the good of my patients according to my ability and my judgment, and never to harm anyone." The vows are attributed to the Greek physician and teacher Hippocrates. c. 460 – 377 BC, who practiced on the island of Kos. Unlike his predecessors, who relied on superstitious practices in their treatment of patients, Hippocrates believed that diseases were brought on not by supernatural causes but by natural ones. He further believed that disease could be studied and cured. This assertion forms the basis of modern medicine, which is why Hippocrates is called the father of medicine. It is largely owing to another prominent Greek physician that the oath was handed down through history. Galen, AD 129 c. 199, was physician to Roman emperors Marcus Aurelius 121 to 80, from 161, and Lucius Commodus 161 to 92, from 168. He demonstrated that arteries carry blood, not air, as had been thought, and, like Hippocrates, Galen believed in the four humors of the body. He left medical texts that for centuries were considered the authoritative works on medical practice. Galen's writings reveal his high regard for Hippocrates, who lived and worked many centuries earlier.
When did Halley's Comet first appear?
Its first noted appearance was in 239 B.C., but it was British astronomer Edmund Halley, 1656 to 1742, who noted that the bright comet he observed in 1682 followed roughly the same path as those that had been observed in 1531 and 1607. He suggested that they were all the same comet and that it would reappear in 1758. It did reappear, and it was therefore named for Halley, who was England's second astronomer royal. Thanks to Halley, the common man could rest a bit easier at night, before the British astronomer proved, through his observations and previous astronomical data, that comets are natural objects subject to the laws of gravity. People had viewed occurrences of comets as harbingers of doom. Halley's comet has been observed by astronomers every time it has appeared since 239 BC. Most recently, seen in 1985 and 1986, the comet will make another appearance in 2061, and roughly every 76 years thereafter. It's also worth noting that it was Halley who encouraged his friend and fellow scientist Sir Isaac Newton, 1642 to 1727, to write his theory of gravity, which he did, Principia Mathematica, which Halley used his own money to publish, appeared in 1687 and is considered a seminal work of modern science.
What is Gray's anatomy?
It is the popular name for anatomy of the human body, descriptive and surgical. Written by English physician Henry Gray, 1825 or 1827 to 1861. First published in 1858, the tome is still considered the standard work on anatomy, and it is in print today in several editions, including the concise Gray's Anatomy. Gray was a lecturer in anatomy at London's St. George's Hospital and was a Fellow of Britain's Royal College of Surgeons. He was 33 years old when he compiled the book, which went on to be used by medical students for more than a century.
When was the first hospital established in North America?
It was in 1503 when the Spanish built a hospital in Santo Domingo in the Dominican Republic, then known as Hispaniola. It is no longer in existence, but ruins remain. On the North American mainland, the first hospital was opened in Quebec, Canada, in 1639. The first incorporated hospital in the United States was the Pennsylvania Hospital in Philadelphia, chartered in 1751 with the support of statesman Benjamin Franklin, 1706 to 1790.
Did Aristotle develop his own philosophy?
A student of Plato's for 20 years, Aristotle's ideas were unquestionably influenced by his teacher. However, Aristotle developed his own doctrine, which he applied to many subjects. Aristotle rejected Plato's theory of forms, or theory of ideas. While Aristotle, too, believed in material, the physical being, and forms, the unchanging truths. Unlike his teacher, he believed that it is the concrete, material, that has substantial being. Aristotle viewed the basic task of philosophy as explaining why and how things are, or how they become what they are. It is for this reason that Aristotle had not only a profound and lasting influence on philosophy but on scientific spirit.
What were Sir Francis Bacon's beliefs?
The English philosopher, author, and statesman was one of the great minds of the scientific revolution of the 1500s and 1600s, during which the way that Europeans viewed themselves and the universe underwent a dramatic change. Bacon, 1561 to 1626, believed that humankind's accepted notions about nature should be aggressively challenged. As a young man studying at Trinity College, he concluded that the Aristotelian system, or deductive logic, was without merit. Bacon favored observation, or inductive logic, as a system for interpreting and understanding nature. He argued that the understanding of nature was being held back by the blind acceptance of the beliefs of ancient philosophers such as Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, and Plato, c. 428 to 347 BC. A religious person, Bacon maintained that theology should not be questioned. He believed that rational inquiry can unlock the secrets of nature but not of the human soul. Bacon therefore insisted on the separation of philosophy and theology, an idea that ran counter to the academic traditions of the time. Consequently, he was a staunch proponent of educational and scientific reform. Trained in law, Bacon served as a royal diplomat in France, was admitted to the bar, elected to Parliament, and served in public office, including the jobs of Solicitor General and Attorney General. He penned several seminal works, including essays, 1597, which consists of practical wisdom and observations. Advancement of Learning, 1605, a survey of the state of knowledge. Bacon was attempting to enlist the support of the king in the total reform of education and science in England, and Novum Organum, 1620. In which he put forth his method for understanding nature by an inductive system, based on direct observation, versus Aristotle's deductive method, which was based on circumstantial evidence and prior conclusions.
What is Plato's theory of forms?
The theory, or doctrine, of forms, also called the theory of ideas, is Greek philosopher Plato's, c. 428 to 347 BC, expression of his belief that there are forms that exist outside the material realm, and therefore are unchanging. They do not come into existence, change, or pass out of existence. It is these ideas that, according to Plato, are the objects or essence of knowledge. Further, he posited that the body, the seat of appetite and passion, which communes with the physical world, rather than the world of ideas or forms, is inferior to the intellect. He believed the physical aspect of human beings to be irrational, while the intellect, or reason, was deemed to be rational. The origins of Plato's theory can be traced to Socrates, c. 470 to 399 BC, who believed that the psyche, inner spirit, has intuitive access to divinely known principles or truths, which he attempted to formulate through his conversations with others. Indeed, the Socratic dialogues, written by Plato, reveal that Socrates was striving to define the exact nature of the traditional Greek moral virtues of piety, temperance, and courage.
What are the four humors?
The four humors are the bodily fluids, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile, originating in the heart, brain, liver, and spleen, respectively. One work assigned to Greek physician Hippocrates, c. 460 c. 377 BC, Nature of Man, asserts that illness is caused by an imbalance of the four humors, fluids, in the body. The presence of these humors was thought to determine the health and personality of a person. This belief prevailed for centuries but was finally discredited by modern science. During the Middle Ages, 500-1350, each of the humors was assigned certain characteristics. Someone of ruddy complexion was believed to have an excessive amount of blood in his or her system. That person would be sanguine, cheerful and optimistic in character. The word sanguine is derived from the Latin word sanguis, meaning blood. Someone who had an imbalance resulting in more phlegm was considered phlegmatic, and would have a slow and impassive temperament. An individual who had excessive yellow bile was considered hot-tempered, and a person who had more black bile in his or her physiological system was believed to be melancholic.
Who was Euclid?
The Greek mathematician Euclid, 330-270 B. C. is considered the father of geometry. He used axioms, accepted mathematical truths, to develop a deductive system of proof, which he wrote in his textbook Elements. This book proved to be a great contribution to scientific thinking and includes Euclid's proof of the Pythagorean theorem. Euclid's first three postulates, with which he begins his Elements, are familiar to anyone who has taken geometry. 1. It is possible to draw a straight line between any 2 points. 2. It is possible to produce a finite straight line continuously in a straight line. And 3. A circle may be described with any center and radius.
What advances were made in medicine during the Renaissance?
The chief advance of the Renaissance, 1350 to 1600, was an improved understanding of the human anatomy. This knowledge was the direct result of dissection, which was prohibited during the Middle Ages, 500-1350. The scientific spirit of the Renaissance saw those laws relaxed, and researchers were free to dissect human corpses for study. Among those who practiced dissection was Leonardo da Vinci, 1452 to 1519. While the Italian artist may be better known for the Mona Lisa, he also contributed greatly to the understanding of human anatomy, producing more than 750 anatomical drawings as a result of his studies in dissection.
What was Plato's relationship to Socrates and Aristotle?
The Athens-born Plato, originally Aristocles, was Socrates' disciple and Aristotle's teacher. The philosophies of these three men combined to lay the foundations of Western thought. With the death sentence of his spiritual guide, Socrates, in 399 BC, Plato's c. 428 to 347 BC, dissatisfaction with the Athenian government reached its peak. Traveling throughout the Mediterranean after the death of Socrates, Plato returned to Athens in 387 BC, and 1 mile outside of the city he established the Academy, a school of philosophy supported entirely by philanthropists. Students paid no fees. One of the pupils there was young Aristotle, 384 to 322 BC, who remained at the Academy for 20 years before venturing out on his own. Plato wrote a series of dialogues in which Socrates figures prominently. The most highly regarded of these is the Republic, in which Plato discusses justice and the ideal state. It was his belief that people would not be able to eliminate injustice from society until rulers became philosophers. Until all philosophers are kings, or the kings and princes of this world have the spirit and power of philosophy, and political greatness and wisdom meet in one. And those commoner natures who pursue either to the exclusion of the other are compelled to stand aside. Cities will never have rest from their evils, no, nor the human race. Also on the subject of the ideal state, Plato wrote but did not finish Laws. His other works include Symposium, which considers ideal love, Phaedrus, which attacks the prevailing notions about rhetoric, Apology, which is a rendering of the speech Socrates delivered at his own trial in 399 BC, and Phaedo, which discusses the immortality of the soul and which is supposed to be a record of Socrates' last conversation before he drank hemlock and died.
What was the philosophy of the Middle Ages?
During medieval times, 500-1350, philosophers concerned themselves with applying the works of ancient Greek thinkers, such as Aristotle, 384-322 c. and Plato, c. 428-347 BC, to Christian thought. This movement, which spanned most of the Middle Ages and reached its high water mark in the 13th century, was called scholasticism since its proponents were often associated with universities. The word scholastic is derived from the Greek scholastikos, meaning to keep a school. In the simplest terms, the goal of scholasticism has been described as the Christianization of Aristotle. Indeed, medieval philosophers strived to use reason to better understand faith. Scholasticism was, therefore, both rational and religious. The movement was also an interesting occasion of East meets West. The commentaries of Islamic philosophers, principally Ibn Nasr, c. 878-950, Averroes, 1126-1198, and Avicenna, 980-1037, figured prominently in scholasticism. Theologians, including Saint Anselm and Saint Thomas Aquinas, used the non-Christian philosophy both of the ancient Greeks and of Muslim thinkers to better understand their own Christian faith.
What advances were made in medicine during the Middle Ages?
During the Middle Ages, 500-1350, medicine became institutionalized. The first public hospitals were opened and the first formal medical schools were established, making healthcare formerly administered only in the home, more widely available and improving the training of doctors. These developments had been brought on by necessity. Europe saw successive waves of epidemics during the Middle Ages. Outbreaks of leprosy began in the 500s and peaked in the 1200s, the Black Death. The bubonic plague killed about a quarter of the European population. And smallpox and other diseases afflicted hundreds of thousands of people. Consequently, many hospitals meant to serve the poor were established, as were the first medical schools, some of them associated with universities that were then forming, such as the University of Bologna, Italy, and the University of Paris, France. In 900 the first medical school was started in Salerno, Italy. European physicians during the period were greatly influenced by the works of Persian physician and philosopher Rhazes, or Reza, c. 865-c. 930. Considered the greatest doctor of the Islamic world. Rhazes's works accurately describing measles and smallpox were translated into Latin and became seminal references in the Christian world as well. Another prominent Islamic, the scientist Avicenna, or Ibn Sina, 980-1037, produced a philosophical scientific encyclopedia, which included the medical knowledge of the time. In the West, the work became known as Canon of Medicine, and with its descriptions of many diseases, including tetanus and meningitis, it remained influential in European medical education for the next 600 years.
What was the first scientific textbook on human anatomy?
It is a work titled On the Structure of the Human Body, written by Belgian physician and professor Andreas Vesalius. 1514 to 1564, and published in 1543, when he was in his late 20s. Like other anatomists during the Renaissance, 1350 to 1600, Vesalius conducted numerous dissections of human cadavers. Publishing his findings and drawings, his textbook soon became the authoritative reference, overturning the works of Greek physician Galen, 129 c. 199.
What did Alfred Nobel do?
The Swedish chemist whose name is known around the world because of the Nobel Prize. Invented dynamite, 1866. Even though dynamite improved the safety of explosives, Alfred Nobel 1833 to 1896, became concerned with how his invention would be used. Nobel was a pacifist. He was involved in the explosives industry because it was his family's business. In his will, he set up a fund, bequeathing a sum of $9.2 million to reward people who make strides in the sciences, literature, and promoting international peace. He died in 1896, and the Nobel Prize has been awarded annually, except for 1940 to 42, since 1901. Recipients in any of 5 categories: physics, chemistry, medicine/physiology, literature, and peace are presented with a gold medal, a diploma, and a substantial monetary award in the hundreds of thousands of US dollars for each laureate. A sixth related award is the prize in economic sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel, which was established in 1968 by the Swedish National Bank and was first awarded in 1969. The laureates are announced each year in October, and the prizes are handed out in ceremonies on December 10, the anniversary of Nobel's death.
What did Alfred Nobel do?
The Swedish chemist whose name is known around the world because of the Nobel Prize. Invented dynamite, 1866. Even though dynamite improved the safety of explosives, Alfred Nobel 1833 to 1896, became concerned with how his invention would be used. Nobel was a pacifist. He was involved in the explosives industry because it was his family's business. In his will, he set up a fund, bequeathing a sum of $9.2 million to to reward people who make strides in the sciences, literature, and promoting international peace. He died in 1896, and the Nobel Prize has been awarded annually. Except for 1940–42, since 1901. Recipients in any of 5 categories: physics, chemistry, medicine/physiology, literature, and peace are presented with a gold medal, a diploma, and a substantial monetary award. In the hundreds of thousands of US dollars for each laureate. A 6th related award is the prize in economic sciences in memory of Alfred Nobel, which was established in 1968 by the Swedish National Bank and was first awarded in 1969. The laureates are announced each year in October, and the prizes are handed out in ceremonies on December 10, the anniversary of Nobel's death.
Why was the development of the quantum theory important?
German physicist and professor Max Planck, 1858–1947, originated and developed the quantum theory. From 1900, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1918. The basic theory is that energy and some other physical properties can exist in tiny, finite amounts, called quanta. Before Planck's work, theories of classical physics held that energy and physical properties varied continuously. Planck experimented with blackbody radiation. A black body is any substance that absorbs all of the radiant energy that falls on it, reflecting none of it. He concluded that radiant energy can be divided, and the particles, quanta, would have values proportional to those of the energy source. Planck determined the relationship between the amount of energy that light has and its frequency. Along with Albert Einstein's, 1897–1955, theory of relativity. The quantum theory forms the basis of modern physics. Since it was developed, the quantum theory has been applied to numerous processes involving the transfer of energy in an atomic or molecular scale, including in 1913 when it was used by Danish physicist and Nobel laureate, 1922, Niels Bohr, 1885–1962, to explain atomic structure. The theory has been used to explain how electrons move through the chips in a personal computer, the decay of nuclei, and how lasers work.
Why was the development of the quantum theory important?
German physicist and professor Max Planck, 1858–1947, originated and developed the quantum theory. From 1900, for which he was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physics in 1918. The basic theory is that energy and some other physical properties can exist in tiny, finite amounts, called quanta. Before Planck's work, theories of classical physics held that energy and physical properties varied continuously. Planck experimented with blackbody radiation. A black body is any substance that absorbs all of the radiant energy that falls on it, reflecting none of it. He concluded that radiant energy can be divided, and the particles, quanta, would have values proportional to those of the energy source. Planck determined the relationship between the amount of energy that light has and its frequency. Along with Albert Einstein's 1897 to 1955 theory of relativity, the quantum theory forms the basis of modern physics. Since it was developed, the quantum theory has been applied to numerous processes involving the transfer of energy in an atomic or molecular scale, including in 1913 when it was used by Danish physicist and Nobel laureate, 1922, Niels Bohr, 1885 to 1962, to explain atomic structure. The theory has been used to explain how electrons move through the chips in a personal computer, the decay of nuclei, and how lasers work.
Why is the equation E equals mc2 historically significant?
The famous equation was put forth in 1905 by German-born physicist and Nobel laureate. 1921, Albert Einstein, 1879 to 1955, and became important to history largely because it, along with the quantum theory, developed by Max Planck in 1900, laid the foundation for nuclear energy. It is part of Einstein's theory of relativity, 1905, 1916. In the formula, E is energy, m is mass, and c squared is a constant factor equal to the speed of light squared. The equation illustrates the relationship between, and exchangeability of, energy and matter. In the 1930s, when scientists discovered a way to split atoms, the minute particles of which elements are made, they learned that the subatomic particles that were created have a total mass less than the mass of the original atom. In other words, when the atom was split, part of the mass of the atom had been changed into subatomic particles, but some of it had been converted into energy. Using Einstein's formula E equals mc2, the scientists calculated how much energy was produced by splitting an atom. This atom splitting method for creating energy is the basis for nuclear energy. The term nuclear refers to the atomic process, which uses the nucleus or central portion of an atom to release energy. Today, we live in the nuclear age, where power and weapons are produced using the atomic process for creating energy.
Why is the equation E equals mc2 historically significant?
The famous equation was put forth in 1905 by German-born physicist and Nobel laureate. 1921, Albert Einstein, 1879 to 1955, and became important to history largely because it, along with the quantum theory, developed by Max Planck in 1900, laid the foundation for nuclear energy. It is part of Einstein's theory of relativity, 1905-1916. In the formula, E is energy, m is mass, and c squared is a constant factor equal to the speed of light squared. The equation illustrates the relationship between, and exchangeability of, energy and matter. In the 1930s, when scientists discovered a way to split atoms, the minute particles of which elements are made, they learned that the subatomic particles that were created have a total mass less than the mass of the original atom. In other words, when the atom was split, part of the mass of the atom had been changed into subatomic particles, but some of it had been converted into energy. Using Einstein's formula E equals mc2, the scientists calculated how much energy was produced by splitting an atom. This atom splitting method for creating energy is the basis for nuclear energy. The term nuclear refers to the atomic process, which uses the nucleus or central portion of an atom to release energy. Today, we live in the nuclear age, where power and weapons are produced using the atomic process for creating energy.
Why did Einstein write to President Roosevelt urging U.S. development of the atom bomb?
Albert Einstein, who was born in Germany in 1879 and was educated in Switzerland, where he also became a naturalized citizen, was an ardent pacifist. But, being a brilliant observer, he quickly perceived the threat posed by Nazi Germany. Einstein was visiting England in 1933 when the Nazis confiscated his property in Berlin and deprived him of his German citizenship. Some might call it lucky that the Nobel Prize-winning, 1921, scientist was out of the country. When this happened in the coming years, other Jews certainly suffered worse fates as Nazi Germany. Under despotic ruler Adolf Hitler, 1889–1945, persecuted and killed more than 6 million Jews. Einstein moved to the United States, where he took a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. There he settled and later became an American citizen, 1940. In August 1939, just before Adolf Hitler's German troops invaded Poland and began World War II. 1939–45, Einstein wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1882–1945, urging him to launch a government program to study nuclear energy. He further advocated the United States build an atomic bomb, cautioning that such an effort might already be underway in Germany. The United States did in fact begin development of the atomic bomb, which releases nuclear energy by splitting heavy atomic particles. The program was called the Manhattan Project, and it was centered at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington, where scientists worked to obtain sufficient amounts of plutonium and uranium to make the bombs. The bombs themselves were developed in a laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico. The project was funded by the government to the tune of $2 billion. The first atomic device, made of plutonium, was tested in Alamogordo, New Mexico. On July 16, 1945. And less than a month later the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima. August 6, and Nagasaki, August 9, Japan, forcing the Japanese to surrender. After the war, Einstein, who was always interested in world and human affairs, and had regretted the death and destruction in Japan, advocated a system of world law that he believed could prevent war in the atomic, or nuclear, age. A Zionist Jew, in 1952 he was offered the presidency of the relatively new State of Israel. Founded 1947, but he declined the honor. He died in New Jersey in 1955.
Why did Einstein write to President Roosevelt urging U.S. development of the atom bomb?
Albert Einstein, who was born in Germany in 1879 and was educated in Switzerland, where he also became a naturalized citizen, was an ardent pacifist. But, being a brilliant observer, he quickly perceived the threat posed by Nazi Germany. Einstein was visiting England in 1933 when the Nazis confiscated his property in Berlin and deprived him of his German citizenship. Some might call it lucky that the Nobel Prize-winning, 1921, scientist was out of the country. When this happened in the coming years, other Jews certainly suffered worse fates as Nazi Germany. Under despotic ruler Adolf Hitler, 1889 to 1945, persecuted and killed more than 6 million Jews. Einstein moved to the United States, where he took a position at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, New Jersey. There he settled and later became an American citizen, 1940. In August 1939, just before Adolf Hitler's German troops invaded Poland and began World War II. 1939–45, Einstein wrote a letter to President Franklin D. Roosevelt, 1882–1945, urging him to launch a government program to study nuclear energy. He further advocated the United States build an atomic bomb, cautioning that such an effort might already be underway in Germany. The United States did in fact begin development of the atomic bomb, which releases nuclear energy by splitting heavy atomic particles. The program was called the Manhattan Project, and it was centered at Oak Ridge, Tennessee, and Hanford, Washington, where scientists worked to obtain sufficient amounts of plutonium and uranium to make the bombs. The bombs themselves were developed in a laboratory in Los Alamos, New Mexico. The project was funded by the government to the tune of $2 billion. The first atomic device, made of plutonium, was tested in Alamogordo, New Mexico. On July 16, 1945. And less than a month later the United States dropped atomic bombs on Hiroshima. August 6, and Nagasaki, August 9, Japan, forcing the Japanese to surrender. After the war, Einstein, who was always interested in world and human affairs, and had regretted the death and destruction in Japan, advocated a system of world law that he believed could prevent war in the atomic, or nuclear, age. A Zionist Jew, in 1952 he was offered the presidency of the relatively new State of Israel. Founded 1947, but he declined the honor. He died in New Jersey in 1955.